It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Welcome in. Take Command Podcast. I'm Craig Hoffman. That is Logan Paulsen. We got a mailbag for you here on a Tuesday. It was much more fun, Logan, on our old schedule a couple off seasons ago when it was Mailbag Monday. But now this podcast doesn't come out till Tuesday. So it's just Mailbag Tuesday.
Well, we're trying to get. Well, we were trying to film it on Monday, right? But we had like some stuff, some things.
Yeah, but we used to actually release the show on Monday.
See, that's how locked in I am.
Yeah, you care about your end of it. You care about the back end. When the folks hear it, you hear it when you hear it. We release twice a week. We actually, speaking of the back end, remind me after we get done recording, talk to you about what we're doing the rest of the week. I don't know when we're recording. This week's crazy. Next week's crazy. The week after is crazy. Logan, we're 2 weeks until the NFL Combine.
Dude, I know it. I'm doing like draft stuff. Like you were a little bit late getting on today because you had to drop somebody off at the train station. But I was like, it's okay because I have to watch about 200 people for the Combine. So like, no worries. So yeah, we're in it right now. We're in the grind of it here.
Yeah, we'll start getting into some draft and free agency stuff later this week, next week for sure. I mean, we'll touch on it in some of the mailbag questions we have today for sure as well. But Logan and I will both be in Indianapolis, so looking forward to that. We typically do a couple of episodes while we're on site there, so that's always a good time. Speaking of scheduling nightmares, trying to get the big fella to sit down, trying to keep track of you in Indianapolis. You're a man in high demand, but I'll get that straightened out. I'll corral him. I'll corral Logan Paulsen. But we're going to start off today before we get to the mailbag with some chatter about the Super Bowl. And Logan, people will be like, "Oh, what do we learn from the Super Bowl?" And I'm like, these two teams have been here. These two teams have been around. Yeah. I don't know that there's a ton we learned specifically from the game. Other than like some stuff that's specific to the game. We talk about the team building stuff. Like I had someone call into the radio show on Monday and say like, well, what does Adam Peters learn from this game? Knowing he's got to get past the Eagles. I'm like, nothing. He learned everything he needed to know in the NFC Championship game when his team lost in significant fashion, similar to the Chiefs. But I do think the game itself is interesting. It's not a game that we thought would be a lot closer. Obviously, Eagles just thoroughly dominant. They're clearly the best team in football this year. By the way, the only team to beat them since their Week 5 bye was the Washington Commanders. But they just throttled Kansas City. And I mean that both figuratively and literally, the way that they tighten the screws defensively on them to a level that I didn't think was possible against that offense and specifically that quarterback.
Yeah, it was really crazy. I was watching the game, and I kind of had this expectation going in. Like everybody asked, who you got in the Super Bowl? What do you think? And I kind of was like, well, I think it's going to be a one-score game, right? They're going to kind of play it out. That's what Philly wants to do. That's what Kansas City wants to do. And if you're giving it and if it's a last possession football game, you're going to give it to Patrick Mahomes. But I will say I want to say it was the second 3-and-out or second 4-and-out that Kansas City had. I had this thing in my head that popped up. I was like, oh, they don't get it. They don't get how good Philly's defense is in the back end. They don't understand the speed they're dealing with. They don't understand how well coached the back end of that group is. Because again, like everyone's talking about the offensive line, I do think that's a big story, obviously. And I think that's something that you mentioned things to learn. I think that's one of the things to learn is like when you got a guy, let's make sure you got an offensive line to help him out and protect him. But I think the one thing is his time to throw was 3.2 seconds, which is pretty long for Patrick Mahomes. And to me, that's him looking to the first read. It's not there. Everything's dead. And how many times in prepping for Philly this year, the 3 times we played them, did you just watch a coverage and be like, there is no air here. There's no air. And I wish I could articulate this in a way that showed how impressive that is to the listener. But when you watch defenses, usually you're like, oh, like here's a free runner. Oh, the back's open in the flat. Oh, you can easily get to this dig if you kind of give it a beat. There is zero air. And so that's when I was watching the game. I was like, they don't get it. They're not ready for how good this defense is, and that showed up big time as the game went on. So it literally went from, I think it's going to be a one-score game, to after the second 3-and-out, I'm like, this might be a blowout. I literally had that thought. I said it to my wife out loud. Like, I just was like, they don't understand how good this group is defensively, and Philly is not going to make a lot of mistakes offensively to let you get back in it, and that's exactly what happened.
They even make the one, and it just doesn't matter because by the end, and there's so many points in that game because it's Pat and because it's the Chiefs that you're like, Oh, there's the point, the interception. They have this chance, where they get the ball backed up. You're like, oh, Patrick is about to lead them on a 93-yard touchdown drive. They'll get the ball to start the second half, and this thing will be 17-14 before Jalen Hurts touches it again. And instead, Joe Thuney gets bull rushed into Patrick Mahomes' leg. He throws a pick to Zach Bond. Bang, score, 24-0. And the game is basically over at halftime. We enjoy Kendrick Lamar, and then it's just a coronation in the second half. And especially after Philly comes out and like 3 and out or 4 and out, whatever it was, and then the dagger to Devontae Smith to make it even more certain that game was not going to be some historical comeback. Can you remember a point in your career where you played a defense like that, where you watch them on film and you know that they're good? Because there's no way Kansas City didn't know that Philly was really good, but just playing against them. Like once you get on the field, you're like, oh, this is not what I thought was going to happen. This is way worse.
Yeah, the one that comes to mind for me, and I was actually talking to Santana about this, and I was like, I haven't seen a defense like this. He's like, what about those old Baltimore defenses? And those old Baltimore defenses felt like that. Like you watched them on film, you saw one thing, and then when you got on the field, like they were just so big and so physical and so fast. And so I think that's a pretty good comparison. I will say it's different. Like, and what I mean by that is, so back, in when was that, 2010, 2011, whenever we were playing Baltimore, and I even miss like peak Baltimore because I think it was the year prior. It was like 2007 maybe when they were really good or they won that Super Bowl. But I don't remember exactly. But my point is that like they played a lot of single high, 8-man boxes, Ed Reed doing his thing in the back end.
Ed Reed was 3 people in the back end by himself.
Yeah. And so now because of how offenses have changed, because how defensive emphasis has changed, like it's literally, he articulated this really well. It's literally like just 6 dudes in the box and Vic Fangio's like, you figure it out. And the back end is just there. Like they are just in the zones and the hot spots of the defense. And so, yeah, it feels like that where you're just like overwhelmed by the speed, the physicality, the playmaking ability. And it's different, obviously, than Baltimore because those dudes, like Terrell Suggs and Johnson on the other side. And they had these big interior players, Adams and Saragusa and all it just was different, right? But this is it. Like when you're watching it on the sideline, it has that same kind of like, oh, this is just a little, it's like turned up a little bit. And so that's what it reminded me of. And I think when you look statistically at those great Baltimore defenses, I think they're the number 1 scoring defense maybe of all time with like 17.4. But Philly over the last couple of weeks or over the last kind of chunk of the season is like 17.5. Like just to give you an approximation of like where they're at.
Yeah, I think the all-time Ravens defense was like the 2000 team.
When they beat the Giants, right? Is that
yeah. Like that team where Trent Dilfer was the Super Bowl winning quarterback, and all due respect to Dilfer, but like almost any NFL quarterback with a pulse could have been the quarterback of that team. Like that defense literally gave up. I think it might have been like 13 a game. Like it was
crazy.
A grotesque defense. You have them, you have the 85 Bears, you have the 2013 Seahawks, you have that 2007 Giants team that beats the 18-0 a couple of my friends, we call it the 18-0 Patriots because they lose the Super Bowl obviously, but it's that Randy Moss like insane offense and just the pass rush that the Giants have. And I think that's the thing that sticks out in this game is not only do they have dudes in DeJean and Mitchell and Bond and Blankenship and Slay. They got guys that are really fast and really intelligent and really well coached. They also have a lot of them, and both in that they have depth and also they blitzed 0 times in this game. Literally 0. They had some simulated pressures, so there are some times that they're able to create free runners, which is crazy against like you have Pat Mahomes and Creed Humphrey, and you're still getting free runners because you're able to confuse their protection rules enough that Zach Bond is flying, unblocked through the B gap. But then just the fact that you have 7 or 8 guys in coverage on every snap with that intelligence, with that range. Like that that's how you tighten the screws like that is like you just don't have anybody who's overexposed. And not to mention against the guys like Mahomes, and I actually think Jaden is this way too. Like we talked about this with Daniels this year. If you blitz, his eyes are going to obviously see that flash of like, oh, that's an extra guy coming. And often there's space vacated behind it. And so if you're fast enough with your release and your processing, blitzes are opportunities. And Mahomes is as good as that are as good at that as anyone. And because they did not give him the opportunities to beat the blitz, he had to just beat coverage. And when you have to beat coverage and the 4-man rush is getting home, that's a nightmare. Like there's just no, I don't know what the offensive fix is for that outside of being like, screw this, we're not going to pass, we're going to run the ball. And Kansas City couldn't really do that either.
Well, I think, not to make this about the Commanders, but I think it's a testament to how well Jaden played in the championship game, especially on those first couple of drives, man. He did a great job. Again, finding those tight window throws, being aggressive in man-to-man coverage. And I think it just shows you kind of the mindset you need to have that Dan Quinn brought in, going for it on fourth down. Like, that's what you needed to do versus this team, and I think, again, it's so tight. And then the way that Zach Bond plays underneath, the way he's able to get into zones, the way he's able to close throwing windows, and it's all married together so well. It's so cinched, and that's why it was so weird watching the second matchup that the Commanders had versus the Eagles, where they're able to hit those two explosive plays over the top, because everything had just been so well timed and so well formulated the entire season. And I guess they're allowed a hiccup, and good thing it happened versus the Commanders. But man, it's hard to articulate how good they are at playing defense. They are tremendous. And so I really felt like that Kansas City did understand it. And if you want solutions, you have to be able to run the ball a little bit. You need a couple easy buttons. And I think, again, going back to the championship game, you're able to run a couple whams, a couple quarterback runs, just to kind of keep you on schedule, to keep the defense honest. And I think when you look at the LA Rams game, they rushed for over, it was 115 yards or something like that with the running back there, Kyron Williams. And that's a testament to them. That's how you deal with them. But again, they are so talented up front, specifically on the interior of the defensive line and at linebacker with Zach Bond, that most teams just aren't equipped to do that. LA's offensive line is good. When they're healthy, that's a good group, and they understand who they are. They understand how to get downhill. They present different looks in terms of run fits, which is a little bit challenging, and they're willing to die by a 3.5 yard a game kind of carry. I don't think Kansas City was equipped to do that. I think Andy Reid knew that, and I think when he said, we're going to run a ton of RPOs, I think about the RPOs that the Commanders ran in the first game, on the Thursday night game, and in the second game. I've never seen a team defend them so well, right? Even in the championship game, just how quickly they are to get up the field and attack those little bubbles and slants and things like that. So it's again, I think that this Kansas City team was depleted compared to other Kansas City teams. They're just a little bit banged up on the offensive line. They don't have maybe the offensive playmaking ability that they've had in the years past. But I think it's a huge testament, in my opinion, to Philly and what they've done throughout the year and how they've been coached and how they've executed. Because, that is a really dominant group, and I think that showed up in the Super Bowl.
For sure. And it also shows you just how, quality drafting, both immediately and in the long term, can just change the trajectory of your franchise. Because both these teams are great, right? They're both really good rosters. The Eagles are the best roster in the league for sure, hands down. They might be one of the best, 1 to 53s that we've had. I can't even
maybe
think of
ever.
A team that was this talented.
Maybe ever.
Yeah,
the one that came to mind earlier was the that Ravens team that won the Super Bowl in 2000. That. Their offensive line was amazing. They had good speed on the outside. They had a good running back. I think they had a 2,000-yard rusher that season. And their defense was, it feels like that. You know what I mean? Just when you're there's dudes everywhere. So
yeah, 100%. And there's just, and obviously Jalen is a lot better than Trent Dilfer. Man, Trent Dilfer's taking bullets in this one. Sorry, Trent.
But I'm not saying that. But I'm saying in terms of
it's top to bottom and at the most important position. We've talked about it. Jalen is. Is he the best pocket passer processor in the league? No, but he does basically everything else well. He's in great command at the line of scrimmage. His leadership skills are A+. There's so much stuff that he does, and his accuracy and specifically his deep ball accuracy. So sure, he might not hit the quick hook, as fast as Jaden Daniels or Patrick Mahomes, but he'll hit the deep ball as well as those guys, and he's got the dudes on the outside to make that a bigger part of their offense. So
yeah, and I think that's a great point too, and it's good to give context to his performance. It took him, I Mia Kimes said this on our podcast, 3.7 seconds to throw the football. The average is 3.4 in the NFL. So obviously, I think that they understand who he is and what he wants to do. They're going to get the best pass protecting offensive line in football, best offensive line in football, period. They let him be him. So like first completion to Devontae Smith, like Devontae's open on the corner, but he like doesn't read it out well. He pulls it down. He kind of loses a little bit of ground, scrambles to his right, and then makes the completion. So the ball got where it needed to go. It just didn't happen in the way that, Jaden Daniels or Joe Burrow would get that done. So I think that's, again, like you've built a team to support the quarterback, much like the Detroit Lions have built a team to support Jared Goff, right? Like that's good. When you don't have a top shelf guy, you need to understand what their weaknesses are and then kind of fill in around that so that they don't have to be in their weaknesses all the time. And Philadelphia, because how talented they are offensively, have done that perfectly. So, talk about something else to learn from Philly. And again, this is hard to kind of hard to kind of navigate because they've hit on their last, their first, second, and third round picks for the last 4 years are all starting contributing members to the team, which is insane. So do that, but fill in the roster to maximize your best players, specifically the quarterback.
For sure. And to finish what I was saying, we've brought it all the way back around, is the Chiefs didn't not address some of their weaknesses. They tried. But between injuries, stupidity, and bad drafting, they've got holes. And so, they've been trying to fix receiver since they traded Tyreek. They look like they had someone in Rashee Rice, and he was a dope all offseason and then got hurt. So there's your receiver problem. They've got a guy that, assuming that all his legal stuff plays out and he heals his ACL, he'll be back next year. And that helps them tremendously. They tried to address offensive line. They, in the third round 2 years ago, and in the second round last year, they took left tackles. Neither one of them was any good to start. And maybe Suamatia winds up being really good. Like, he was super young, super raw, and there was some stuff where you're wondering, like, how mature is he coming into this? But he's so talented that you wonder if 2 years from now is that no longer looked at as a bust. But like, for this year, it didn't help them out. And so they have this hole at left tackle. On down the list, like, they've tried to address their needs, but you have like two bad, quote unquote, drafts in a row, and you go from the two-time defending champion to getting housed in the Super Bowl by a team that didn't miss for 3 years in a row. Like that, and that also,
and bad is relative too. Like, I mean, like Xavier Worthy's been a hit for them. I would say he's going to be a good player, but then you have Suamati in the second round, and then you look at the linebackers they've drafted who've all hit over the last couple of years, but they've been later round picks, and so it's just like, that's what drafting is. I think I don't know exactly what it is, but it feels like it's between like a 35 and a 40% hit rate is a good draft. But like, the Eagles are way on the other end of variance.
They're like at 80%. It's stupid.
Yeah, it's crazy. And they've made good moves and they made smart decisions. So I'm not like detracting.
Well, and they get
from
lucky
that.
with a guy like Bond too, to where he goes from a guy who's a mediocre to bad outside linebacker, and he's defensive player of the year candidate. Like finalist. He's in the montage at the NFL honors for defensive player of the year as inside linebacker. So there's an element of luck, coaching, scouting. Like, they just had it all come together. And like, I think the good news is that I don't think that they're going to be better next year. They might be close to as good, which is terrifying. But like, Milton Williams is going to go get paid in free agency, so they'll be a little worse along the line. Josh Sweat is probably going to get paid in free agency. But also, I think it's hilarious that their big offseason signing was Bryce Huff. He was a healthy scratch in the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
They paid Devin White twice as much as Zach Bond. I don't even know if he's still on the team. I don't know if he made it out of training camp.
He got cut.
Yeah.
Like I want to say week 5 or 6. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, like, we'll see what they do, because obviously these guys are so young. I think they're the third youngest roster in the league, that a lot of these guys are going to come back and better. Like, Mitchell will somehow be better. DeJean will be better. Carter, God forbid, if he is better. But they will not have the depth, I think, next year, because they're going to now have to, like, Bond was on a 1 year, $1.5 million deal, I think it was.
Like, same with Mekhi Becton, though, too.
Yeah,
like, those types of guys are, they're going to get paid for sure.
They're going to get paid, and it's the same question that Washington has, right? Which we'll get to here in a second. Like, they now have to make choices of, like, okay, you guys crushed it. Now curse the Super Bowl. How many of these guys do you want to bring back and get paid? If I'm Philly, like, I'm paying Zach Bond a lot of money to keep him around, but like, what does that mean for the rest of my roster? And so that's, I think, the hope for the rest of the NFC is they're not going to be quite as deep. And I will say this too, Philly, from a health standpoint, had a pretty easy year, and that is hard to repeat in the NFL. And so I'm not wishing ill will or ill health on any of their players, obviously, but this is all before everyone's like, oh my God, the Eagles are going to run the NFL for the next 5 years. It's like, the chances that this confluence of circumstances comes together again like this is slim. I also don't know that I'd put anybody ahead of them as favorites for 2025.
I mean, I'd probably put Kansas City ahead of them because they got a better quarterback, but that's besides the point.
Kansas City's got a lot of questions though too.
Yeah, it's true, and I think they have the most people leaving in free agency or up for free agent contracts.
Kansas City, by the way, the only team with more or fewer players under contract than Washington. So that's certainly something we're going to be talking about a lot.
But I do think you look at Mekhi Becton; he's playing at a Pro Bowl caliber year on like $1 million, which is crazy for an offensive lineman, right? Zach Bond, to get his level of again, we talked about the defense. To me, he might be the number one driver of their success, on defense. And so he's probably going to go, right? He should go if I was him, right? If
or he'll stay because they'll pay him like he went.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So I think, but think about big subtractions possibly from the defense and from the offense. I like Tyler Steen a lot, their backup right guard, but he didn't play as well as Mekhi Becton did this year. And I don't think he ever will because Mekhi Becton's one of one freak in the NFL. Right. So those are the types of decisions that, again, they just kind of put chinks, put dents in the armor. You know what I mean? And that's what's been happening to Kansas City for the last 4 years is you kind of get a little sluggish drafting. Your free agent hits don't hit exactly right. And you look at New Orleans back, they had that really excellent draft where they drafted kind of 5 future Hall of Famers, and you're like, oh, damn. And then they're good, and then they're not good. And it's because you didn't hit consistently. That's the thing about the draft. That's the thing about free agency is it's hard to be consistent for long periods of time. And I think, to your point, that's the luck. Those are the luckiest free agent signings of all time. You take an on-ball linebacker, you put him at off-ball, and he becomes again, one of the best linebackers in football. You take a retread guard who plays at a Pro Bowl level. Those things just don't happen consistently.
Yeah, I would even say that's nice to what Mekhi Becton has been. You take a failed tackle and make him into a Pro Bowl guard.
And then you've hit on all of your picks for the last 4 years of the first 3 rounds. What? Think about so Fred was saying we were talking about which is easier to find the all-star quarterback or do what Philly did. Find your top 5 quarterback or do what Philly did. And statistically, I would say it's harder to do what Philly did. And we know how hard it is to find a generational quarterback. Because think about it, you're just rolling dice, right? And you got to hit sevens on 4 defensive linemen, which they did. You got to hit sevens on a linebacker that no one thought was going to hit. You got to hit sevens on 5 secondary players, 5 offensive linemen, 2 receivers, a tight end, and a running back. Are you kidding me? It just seems impossible to do that consistently. So in terms of which is easier, we know how hard it is to find a quarterback. What they did with the roster is probably the hardest thing I've ever. It's statistically almost impossible to do. So I do think there will be a regression from them. I think they're still very, very good, obviously, but I think there'll be a little bit of a regression.
They do have a ton of their guys under contract though, and their cap table's stupid. The way they've structured these contracts, guys for next year, the cap number they have is so small. For a lot of these guys. Now
they're all rookies. A lot of them on their rookie deals.
I'm talking about
on his rookie deal.
I'm talking about the vets. The way that they structure these guys is crazy. Let me see if I can pull it up. This is 26. Let's see. Oh, but it's the base salary numbers. The base salary numbers next year. The cap hits are a little bit higher, obviously, because signing bonuses, options, whatever. But here's the base salaries for next year. Jalen Hurts, 1.17. A.J. Brown, 1.17. Lane Johnson, 1.2. Mailata, 1.17. Slay, 1.2. Goddard, 1.2. Devontae Smith, 1.17. Barkley, 1.6. Landon Dickerson, 1.17. Then you get down to Jalen Carter's next on the list, 1.03, because he's on his rookie deal. But that's the guys in order of cap hits and their base salary. Now, the cap numbers, Jalen's 21, AJ's 17, Lane's 17, on down the list. But still, those are not bad numbers. 26 is where some of it comes due, where Jalen's got actually, no, wait, is it 26 or 27? 27. Hurts is going to count like 41 million towards the cap. So there's, and then 2029, you have a $97 million cap hit for Jalen Hurts. So obviously, you'll be restructuring before then. But they've been able to push some of this money later in the cap. Like in 2029. Jordan Mailata's got a base salary of $50 million and a $35 million cap number. I don't even know how that works. Yeah. But that according to Over the Cap. So like they've done some creative structuring, and I think that's another lesson too. Like that takes some cash from the owner to be able to do some of this stuff, to pay guys up front and have the contracts work the way they're working, which gives you flexibility year over year. And so that's something that certainly I'm sure Adam Peters has gone to Josh Harris and been like, hey, so this is how Philly's able to do this from a structure standpoint. Let's copy that, and so that's something that I think you can take as well. But it's going to be a fun off season, which brings us to our mailbag. This is Take Command. I'm Craig Hoffman. That is Logan Paulsen. Thanks for checking us out. Of course, if you are listening to part of this, or actually, Logan, this is also on the radio on 106.7 The Fan. So, if you're just catching us on The Fan and you want to check us out in full podcast form, just search Take Command wherever you're getting your podcast. If you're currently listening to the full podcast, well, you knew that already. All right, we're doing a mailbag here. Very, very fun thing that we try to lean into much more in the off season. Although I think next year, Logan, we're going to find time for an in-season mailbag because I love a mailbag. And this question comes in from John, who on Instagram is Big John Little, which I think is funny. I'm guessing his name is John Little, but he's a large man, so he's Big John Little. What's up, Craig? For the mailbag, what positions are quote-unquote solved going into the offseason? I have QB1, center, wide receiver 1, free safety, and cornerback 2/3, depending on how you classify Sainer still. Not saying everything else will be replaced, but for those, I don't think you do more than a glance. Thanks. All right, Big John Little, time to answer your question. I love this. I think this is a fun activity because, as we mentioned earlier when we were talking about Kansas City has the fewest players under contract going into 2025 in the NFL. The Washington Commanders are second. So there is a ton of guys that, even if you bring the guy back, like you actually have to win that negotiation and bring that guy back, a la Bobby Wagner, Zach Ertz, etc. So, Logan, with that said, what positions do you think the Commanders are fully set at? Obviously, quarterback. We can skip that one. Jaden Daniels, check. But even then, like you got to. Marcus Mariota is a free agent. You got to figure out QB2. So there's even stuff down roster there.
Yeah, I mean, I think he kind of went through a couple of positions there, and I think they're all good selections, right? I think the one position I'm like, we're 100% set at is obviously quarterback, right? Like the quarterback one thing, that's pretty locked in, I feel. Jane Daniels proved that he's that guy, and he's a guy you can build around, and you should build around moving forward. The Terry thing, I think, is pretty locked in, feels like, after this year, and especially the relationship he has with Jaden. He said center, which I think is probably close. Again, like this is one of those things where that feels like the right thing, and especially given his contract from last year. But outside of that, I'm not. I think it's all kind of on the table to me. He said free safety, and I think he's kind of pointing to Quan Martin there. And I love Quan Martin. Like, I think he's a great football player, had a great year. But if there's like some freak that comes up in the draft that you absolutely love, and you're like, this is our guy, and in camp, like he's the move, or some big time free agent comes available, I think you got to make a move there. I think corner is really interesting. Obviously, like, with how they're going to allocate and move some pieces around there, like where does Sanders still end up playing in 2025? I think it's going to be really interesting. So I'm of the belief that, like, yes, there are a couple positions where you feel really good about them, but I've said this before on the show, like if something better comes up, like I'm definitely not going to turn my nose at it. You know what I'm saying? Like I want to make sure I get the best football team, the most competitive roster I possibly can. But those first three I feel like are probably pretty set. But outside of that, I'm like, let's go shopping, man. Let's figure out how to make this team a really, really good football team in 2025.
So, all right, I'm looking at the Commanders cap sheet now for next year. Daron Payne is set to make the biggest cap hit on the team. Chances are he's going to be here and he's going to start. But you need, I think, more depth along the defensive line for sure. But I would say Payne and Newton are probably your starting defensive tackles next year. Although, if you can, include Duran in a trade, for instance, for I don't know Myles Garrett, then that could change. So definitely, it's not like, oh my God, we're set forever at defensive tackle. Terry, wide receiver 1, check, good for that. Allen technically set to have the third biggest cap hit, but he's got $0 guaranteed dollars, and you save a lot of money by cutting him. I definitely think that's probably going to happen with a post June 1st designation, which means you got $16.4 million extra in cap money coming. Lattimore, they've said he's going to start. He's going to be here. If he's here, he's going to start.
I think so. I think that's one of those things, like, because of the amount of equity you put into the trade and getting him here, and I think that's one where, because again, people, you're more invested in him, right? Like, it's like when you have a first round pick, right? Even if he's not playing well, it's first round draft capital. You want to make sure you see that investment kind of develop, and I feel like that's kind of what they're looking at with Marshawn, which is fair, given that, like, he was hurt for most of the year. He only played 3 games, right?
Yeah.
3 games, is that correct?
3 or 4.
So. Yeah, let him kind of get settled into the culture, get settled in with the team, see if you can get the most out of him. That seems appropriate.
Next guy is one that John didn't mention, but I think is correct. One of the off-ball linebackers is set. That's Frankie Louvu. Louvu is 100% going to be a starter for this team next year. I think his role is up for debate, depending on what else you do. But he is going to play 85 to 100% of the snaps next year.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think that's what I would say, and you kind of took the words right out of my mouth. It's just, again, like, let's say you find, I'm always of the belief, like, we just talked about Philly and looking at examples of how to improve a defense. Like, Zach Bond's ability to cover, run to the football, like, is special. It was very, like, Luke Kuechly-esque, right? Fred Warner, like, his ability to affect the passing game and the run game. So that's where I'd say, like, you can probably find a way to upgrade there, right? Find a guy that can be a little bit more dynamic in that role. And again, Frankie's a good football player. You want him on the field. But if you get a guy that's a kind of a tier above, Bobby right now at this point in his career, kind of like what old Bobby was and what Frankie is right now, like, that's a huge upgrade there. And so then you would kind of have to shift the pieces around a little bit and say, we want Frankie on the field, but this is what he's going to be doing. And we want this other player, whoever it is, to kind of, again, fill some of these kind of pass coverage roles. And again, to your point, it's the role. Like, is he a third down pass rusher? Is he blitzing all the time? Is he rushing in the A gap? He's a good football player. Now we got to figure out what he does, because we've added another good football player.
Yeah. The next guy on the cap sheet / who we should mention here is Sam Cosmi. And they're set at right guard long term. The question is, how long is he going to be out with this ACL injury? For an offensive lineman, it's actually probably a quicker turnaround time in a lot of ways than some of the other positions. There's just not, there is obviously short, powerful stuff, but it's not like full speed cutting. So sometimes offensive linemen can come back from an ACL a little bit quicker than some of the skill guys. But it also depends on, was there any other damage? Was there anything else? And just what does his rehab go like? It's hard to predict now, but if he was hurt in January, it'd be a push to start the season. My guess is he starts the season on PUP by October, November, he's probably back.
That's what I would think too. And again, offensive lineman's weird because it's different than running, but you're dealing with, people around your legs,
pushing, and
and getting bulled, the knee stability there's got to be really locked in. You see guys have a hard time with that sometimes, coming off of a knee injury, just developing that quad strength. It's a different type of strength, obviously. I remember different injury, but I tore my MCL, and moving people in the run game doesn't feel very good. Sitting down on bull rushes, you lose some of that power because you can't, get into your legs the same way. So I definitely think he's going to be fine. The ACL surgeries now are so awesome. The rehabs are so awesome. Our understanding of that injury is so much better. So I'm not worried about it long term, as long as there's no setbacks, as long as there's nothing else going on. But I would assume PUP, just because it was so late in the season. Yeah. But I think long term you feel good about it. But I do think, honestly, it behooves you to bring in more talent there, regardless. And I'm not saying to bench Sam or anything like that, but just to have some depth there.
They need a guard. They might need 2 guards to start the season. So that's something where, if Allegretti winds up starting the season at right guard for Cosmi, but then becomes your swing guard when Cosmi gets back, that's not a bad situation. But then who's playing left guard for Nick? So I think that guard on the list, but Cosme ultimately is someone you can count on long term. Armstrong, he's a role guy. Like for me, like what's his role moving forward? But he'll be here with the contract that he signed. Biotish, I think, obviously we talked about him. And then past that, it really is like, what is Sainer still? What is Coleman?
Yeah.
Certainly, you can upgrade there, but he's probably starting either at left tackle or competing at left tackle or at left guard. And that's kind of it for guys that are under contract. Man, you get down to some that guy's on the team, type of names in terms of guys that are on futures contract, or like you forget they kept Cole Turner around in the practice squad, so he's on the 90-man roster. Like you get down to guys like that really quick. But that's it, I think, for the positions that are kind of set in 2025.
No, I'd agree, and I think there's probably some positives there, in that like it does give you some flexibility. It allows you to be aggressive, and I think that's ultimately what you want to see is not recklessness, but just an aggressive mindset to continuously improve the team. And I think that's going to be so important. Like strength of schedule is going to be more challenging this year. Like, and again, like you want just to. I think Philly's a great example. You just want a talented roster because ultimately it's about the Jimmies and Joes. It's not about the X's and O's. Like I can tell you like how many times you've been drawing up a play or, like, oh, this play is going to be awesome, but you can't get the execution from the players or you don't have the personnel you want to get it done. And I think talented football teams win games. Like look at the teams that were in the playoffs this year. The Bills, very talented. Philly, Detroit. Kansas City, not so much, but they have one of the best quarterbacks in football. I
think some of their talent's even underrated, though. Like, I mean, still, like Karlaftis, Chris Jones, the dude Wharton, 98. Like, I don't know. I haven't watched enough Kansas City.
Played
like,
really well.
That dude had a baller Super Bowl. Sucks for him that they got their asses kicked, but like, that was something. Bolton at the linebacker spot. Like, they do have Creed Humphrey, Trey Smith. Like, so they've got a lot of talent. It's just not necessarily at the skill positions.
Yeah, and I think also like when you look at Baltimore's another great example, hyper talented team. So like that's ultimately what you're chasing is something like that. Now that's going to take a couple of years, but I think if you make good decisions and make good selections and identify the right people, which Adam did such a good job of this last offseason, you're going to be in a pretty good spot. So I think that's kind of where I look at it is there's a couple of people you want to kind of build around, but I'm not married to really anybody. Like you mentioned, I think Coleman's a really good example. Like, is Coleman a good football player? Yes. Is he a commander? Yes. Like, but is he a left guard? Is he a swing player? Is he a left tackle? Like, if you get the right guy in here, maybe he could be a swing player, which again just shows you kind of the maturation and evolution of the talent on the roster, and that's ultimately what you're chasing.
Right, and I think it's hard. This is actually probably a good like secondary conversation to have off of this of like, who do you give the time and just say, like, because of where we are with the cap? Like, Coleman's a good example. If you want to go the vet route, like Luvu or Dorrance Armstrong, right? Like, how much do you really want to spend now at those positions versus just saying, like, we drafted Brandon Coleman to hopefully be our left tackle. We've got to sign, 20-something players just to get to 53. We got to sign 50 players to get to 90. Like this, we have a ton of cap space, but it's going to disappear quickly. Like, how much do you just say? And they made these decisions last year, right? Like, I think they knew pretty quickly, like, Emmanuel Forbes wasn't going to be the answer at corner. Or if they had to come in and guess, is Emmanuel Forbes going to be the answer at corner? They probably would have guessed no, but he was a first-round pick the year prior, and they had so many other things that they had to do that they were like, let's see if we can get him where we want him. Let's see what happens when we get in the building. And so you have guys like that, a guy like Kwame, where you're like, hey, he's a good football player. He does everything we ask. Like, let's just sit tight there and put our resources elsewhere. And sometimes that's the plan until a better opportunity comes. But like, I think that's another interesting way to think about some of these decisions of like, how much gain do you really get from gaining versus using those resources elsewhere?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Because ultimately you're triaging in free agency, right? You're trying to triage and fill the skeleton of the roster out, right? Make sure you have the bones of the thing in place. And so to your point, like, how much time am I going to spend, looking for a free safety? I don't need to spend that much time, I don't think, right? Like, I think he's a good football player. And again, if there's a unicorn that comes across and you're like, wow, you're the guy.
Can't believe this guy's here at 29.
Yeah, like, let's make it happen. Then you do it, right? Because ultimately you're trying to get better. And that's the draft. And so that I'm glad you made that distinction, right? In free agency, I should have everybody taken care of. Every position that I feel like I could go into the season and play a game, right? And feel good about it, right? The draft is the time to add those competitive elements, add the talent, influx the talent, cost-controlled assets, right? Get that stuff going. And that's really what you want to look at. So, yeah, I think they'll probably re-sign probably 14 guys in free agency that were on the team last year. I think they'll kind of look elsewhere to re-sign the other, 15? Fill the whole thing out, get to 90. You feel good about the bones of it, right? Maybe some of those guys are big names. Maybe they're kind of high priority free agents. We'll see, who knows. But then in the draft, it's like, hey, like probably an offensive lineman just to kind of up the talent level a little bit, right? Probably a defensive lineman, maybe edge, interior. It's a very deep class for that. Maybe a tight end. There's a ton of really good tight ends in this class. Probably running back, right? Just to flesh the thing out a little bit and, again, increase the overall talent of the roster. Free agencies for baseline, then peaks and ceilings are now kind of developed in the draft, which, again, Philly's done a great job of that as well.
For sure. And you do not want to, unless you're like the Commanders last year, we have the second pick and like, okay, we're addressing quarterback in the draft. Okay, fine. You have the second pick.
Right.
You do not want to go into a draft having to address something and feeling like we must get a right tackle in the first round of the draft. Because what happens when all of the right tackles that you want are gone? And you can either take a better player at a different position or risk taking a guy way over drafting, whatever. Like, that's a bad situation to be in when you're on the clock. Or like, oh my God, the guys are coming off the board. We have to scramble to make a trade. Like, you don't want to be in that position going into the draft. And so,
especially picking at 29. Exactly. I think that's another thing about this year that's so unique is, last year you're at 2, right? Years past, you've been at 18, right? And I know people are like, oh, 18's like, that's where the talent wears out. Like, you're still in the thick of it, right? You still get a really good football player there, right? But at 29, you can't go in with a glaring need, right? Because you don't know how it's going to go. There's just too much variance ahead of you. And you can trade, you can do whatever you want. But I think it's important to understand, like, just let the draft come to you in this instance. Unless there's a dude that you really like. Adam Peters is pretty good at that, but he's also aggressive at identifying this is the guy. And if that's the guy and you believe in him, like, you can make a subtle move to go get that and make that happen. So I think this year's going to be really interesting. Like, I really can't wait to watch what they do at 29 and at the end of the second, because it totally changes your draft philosophy. All of a sudden you're picking a player that might be a middle of the second round guy on most people's boards, but you like him enough that you're going to take him at 29, right? So it's just the dynamic when you're good changes dramatically, and acquiring top flight blue chip talent becomes even more important and even more challenging. And so that's where Adam Peters has to earn his paycheck. And it's a good thing that he's had a couple years of operating in this kind of bottom of the first half range, because it's tough.
For sure. All right, there's one position that we maybe surprisingly to some people didn't mention in that group. We'll hit on that position next on Take Command. Take Command. I'm Craig Hoffman. That is Logan Paulsen. Let's go 2 more questions in this mailbag, Logan. And we just talked about all the positions that are set. And I think for a large portion of this year, people would have been like, Brian Robinson, sick. We are all set at running back. And then I definitely think by the end of the year, some folks were a little more, let's say, at the very least up in the air, if not out on B-Rob. I think we both agree he's a really good player, but I thought this question that we got from the name is Divine on Instagram. So it's a Divine question. Hey, Craig, love the show. Thanks, Divine. I was just curious about your thoughts on the running back position. Brian Robinson would be cool in a David Montgomery role, but we already have Eckler. So would it be worth just letting him walk? Brian Robinson is not a free agent, I do not believe, this year. He's got 1 more year remaining on his deal. He's accrued 3 seasons, so yeah, he's got 2025 left, his age 26 season, last one on his rookie deal. So it's not like they let him walk, but I think, like, thinking about the future and, like, do you start thinking about a Brian Robinson replacement this year? Not to mention, what do you do with Eckler, who you could either move on from or keep for 2025? I do think is a fascinating thing, and I think that we saw, obviously with the Eagles, how much an impact running back can have, how much of Baltimore a truly impact. Detroit with Jahmyr Gibbs, and Montgomery's a good player. But how do you think that Adam and the staff and Cliff and Anthony Lynn, all of them, screw that. How are you thinking about the running back room this offseason?
Yeah, so I think a lot of fans now are kind of like in this, oh, we need an elite playmaker at the running back position because of the teams you just mentioned. But I also think it's important to understand the context that supports the running back, right? Those are some of the best offenses and offensive lines in football, and they really are the cherry on top for some of those elite offensive line group, or for some of those elite offenses, right? It's the thing that takes San Francisco from a top 10 group to a top 5 group. Same thing with Baltimore, same thing with Detroit, same thing with Philly, right? And so obviously, like, you want a game-changing player at every position. However, like we just talked about with kind of cultivating the roster, is that a top priority for this staff? Is that the thing that's going to take them from a top, what were they, top 8 offense to a top 5 offense this year? I'm not sure, and I think that's something that's important to understand because of the offensive line stuff. Like when you look at Saquon Barkley and look at his career in New York, he is the same player in Philly. He's exactly the same. But what's the different variable is the offensive line and the offense in general support a higher level of production from that player. So my question to this person would be like, where do you think we're at in terms of can an offense support that type of player? I don't think we're there yet. Now, I would probably bet my house.
Saquon Barkley, I believe the number was he had 1,300 yards before contact this season.
Right, which is insane, right? It's an insane number. That's like astronomically insane. However, despite me saying that, I would probably bet my house that they draft a running back this year. Not because I think that they are mad at B-Rob or Eckler or anything like that. It's just a really hyper-talented group of running backs this year. They're going to be great value probably in the 3rd round. You can get a difference maker at the position, a guy that maybe is not Jahmyr Gibbs, right? If you're drafting Jahmyr Gibbs, you probably take him in the 1st round. Bijan Robinson in the 1st round. Who's the kid from Boise State?
Genty, yeah.
Yeah, he's in the 1st round. He's special, right? But there are special running backs in this class, so maybe you take a shot on one and you upgrade the position. And I think that's totally reasonable given how talented the group of running backs is in this class. And I think it's probably something they should do because, again, it's one of those positions with B-Rob on an expiring contract in a year, right? Austin Eckler not coming back as of right now. Like, we talk about infusing this thing with talent. In this draft class, that would be an easy way to infuse with a draft pick that has a kind of moderate value. Late 2nd round pick, late 3rd round pick, compensatory pick, that type of thing would allow you to, again, influx the position, that position group with talent.
So just to clean up on the contracts, Eckler does have one more year. He's got 1 point, if you cut him, 1.5 in dead money, but you save 3.4. So
and I think he deserves to be back. Like I'm just saying, like I think if you want, I think either if you brought both of them, they probably should have both of them back. And I think they are both under contract, correct? Right?
Yes.
Both of them?
Yeah.
Right? So that's fine. But I want to increase the talent, increase
I would
the
add one
competition
more.
in the room. Yes.
Yeah.
100%.
I would 100% just say we're going to bring both guys back. I would draft someone this year, see how that guy does. Because next year, like that's where the question becomes, right? And maybe they redo Austin's contract to give him tack on another year, change the cap number, save a little bit. I mean, it's not like there's a ton of money here that you're talking about. So, and it's not like they necessarily need an extra $1 million, right? But I think that next year, like you're probably not paying B-Rob. And I hate that because, Brian's obviously been through a lot here and has done a good job. He's worked really hard, but why would you can find another Brian Robinson level running back in the draft. That's just the way the running back position is. This is why, unless you're getting the elite guys, like the don't pay running backs thing is still true because there's the amount of, I don't want to call them replacement level. I guess here's how I would phrase it, right? A replacement level running back, that's a really good running back.
Right.
Like that's a good player. And so there's just a high volume of them. Then there's another guy or another tier of guy that's like, I can design my offense around this guy. That guy is worth paying. That guy is Saquon Barkley. That guy is Jahmyr Gibbs. That guy is Derrick Henry. And so Brian Robinson is a very good back in a league where there's a ton of good backs. He also is not particularly versatile, so it's not like you're missing out on some really special pass protector, some really special pass catcher. He's a very good NFL running back, and we see the difference when he's in there and the vision that he has and how he can make some of these runs come alive. But I think you can probably find another one. And whether you go that route in this draft or you go more of the future Austin Eckler replacement in this draft, I think is interesting. But I tend to agree with you. Like, get one this year and then after the season. Like if B-Rob is going to come back on a fairly small potatoes deal, okay. Or you go out and find someone else, whether it's in free agency or the draft next year. But I don't want to have to replace my entire running back room in the free agency draft of 2026.
And it kind of goes back to the other conversation we had about positions that are set, right? Everyone is looking for solid, like get on base at every position, right? And I think we feel good about some of the players. Maybe instead of get on base, there's a couple doubles and triples in there, guys you feel really good about. But if you have grand slam home run option, like you take that guy, right?
Yeah.
You take that guy, even if with Terry, like let's say they're a really, I don't know, like McMillan from Arizona is available. Like you probably draft that guy, not to replace Terry, but just to increase the talent because you think he could be special, right? Or Jamar Chase became available and it was at the right price, right fit. Like you would make those types of moves because you're always looking for that elite special position. Now, there's a financial component to it, which is why the draft is so interesting because it cost controls those assets for you. But that's kind of what I'm saying is if there's a special free safety, if there's a special center, if there's a special insert your person here and you're picking at 29, you're like, we think he's the next thing, take him. It's the same thing with running back, right? It's the same thing. You're just looking for that next step up, that next influx of talent because it's relatively easy in the NFL, to your point, to find solid, right? It's relatively easy to find that. But if there's a special opportunity, you have to take that opportunity. I think that's what we're kind of alluding to here.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say about this too is this is the beauty of how Dan runs the building is ultimately like Brian Robinson, let's say they draft a rookie running back and they're like, we're going to compete. What's B-Rob supposed to say? I've been here. I've been through this. It's my job. I earned it. Like, nah, dude, compete. Like, have you been paying attention? And, you know, that tells you what kind of competitor you are. Because if they bring in some rookie at wide receiver who's super talented, Terry's going to welcome him into the room, say, how can you help us win? And also, you're not good enough to take my job. And he's going to compete, and Terry's probably going to win that competition for now. And that's
the beautiful thing about roster construction is if you've got the right guys, that competition raises everybody, which is what you're talking about. And I think that's why, like, yes, you just want to be more talented. And that's, again, I keep going back to that. Like, no one's really set. Like, no one's got a safe deal. There are guys financially that it makes sense to keep in the role. They played well. But if there's someone that's a baller, get them in there, get everybody competing, get everybody better. That seems like the right solution to me.
And then, you know, can you find creative ways to get multiple guys? If you have two good guys, how do you get them both on the field or use them in their strength, you know, their particular strengths? So, like, that's coaching, baby. All right. Last but not least, we got a couple of different questions about the run defense. The one that I'm going to choose to read was an email that I got. You can go to hoffmanshow.com, use the contact link to get to email me. This one from Thomas. Our Commanders run D baffled me all season long, so I sorted PFF player rankings by snap counts and then looked for bad run defense grades. That's one way to do it, Logan. He said, I was surprised to learn that Noah, Dorrance, and Duran were the culprits for our run defense problems. Does that poor run defense for those players show up when you watch the All-22? If so, does Duran plus the 25 first round and 26 second for Myles Garrett make sense? Seems like it would kill two birds with one stone. Thanks for reading. Love the show. Fills a void for football nerds like me. A couple things that I will caveat here. Just because PFF gave someone a bad run grade, I am not willing to say that then goes as the bad run defense was their fault. There's a lot of factors that goes into it, which to Thomas's question is like, does that show up on the All-22? So he's really kind of asking, how much validity is it to some of those guys? The other part, we've talked about Myles Garrett already on the show. We will probably talk about Myles Garrett again. I think we both, with all due respect to Daron Payne, if you told me it's the 29th pick, Daron Payne, and next year's second, Myles Garrett is a Commander yesterday.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. I think, and it's not a knock on Daron. It's just, I think it's more of a testament to what we think of Myles Garrett. But an answer to the run fit question. So this is something that I am trying to learn a little bit more about is run fits from different coverages, specifically from the too high stuff. So I actually had a meeting, and I'm going to have more meetings with former defensive coaches in the NFL to talk about how they do this. And it's,
if any of them want to have that meeting into a microphone, you let me know and we can get that scheduled.
So basically the first meeting like blew my mind. Like basically I was like, in these too high structures, like basically all linebackers seem to be having, like I've had this thought before, they seem to have two gaps, which doesn't seem right based on like good run fits. However, like in this too high kind of quarters world we're living in, they do have two run fits, right? And then you look at nickel players, and I'm like, well, this is the nickel's gap. But that actually changes based on the position of the back. Like if the back's to you and to the tight end and the passing strength is away, then I'm not in the run fit because I have to defend the RPO. And that's one style of defense, right? So like understanding more nuanced approaches here with regards to run fits, who's in it, who's actually in it. Like they on the sheet, like he showed me the install sheet, when passing strength is away from the tight end and backs to the tight end side, the nickel's not in the run fit, which was surprising to me because I always thought he was a run fit player. So basically they're asking the two linebackers to play two gaps and the corner safety to come down and fit to the tight end side, right? So when I see those grades on PFF, just to give you some insight on how they do the grade, it's literally like someone who doesn't know usually that much about football, like they're an intern kind of level person, and they say, did you make the tackle? Do I think you should make the tackle? Do I think you're in the run fit? And it's a plus or a minus. Basically, that's all it is. So if you don't know schematically what's happening, it becomes really hard, really unfair, I think, especially with some of these off-ball players, to give them bad grades. Now, there are certain examples like, let's say, Dante Fowler, who I think had a really good year, was really dynamic, found explosive stops in the run game, found explosive stops in the pass game, really was a difference maker, kind of surprisingly, which was great. There are times where I'm like, I don't think you're in the right gap. Now, I'm going to reserve judgment and not going to crucify this guy yet, but there are times I'm like, this is not the correct technique because I've seen another player play this run like this earlier in the season multiple times, and you're doing it this way, which is not correct. Like, so for example, because it's fresh in everybody's mind, like that big run that Saquon had in the championship game.
Yeah, the first run of the game.
He should play that up the field. That's your gap. Stay in your gap. When you spin back out, you pick Bobby Wagner, who's the free player to the ball. That to me, like, I'd have to talk to him to confirm for sure, but that seems like a wrong play because the next time they run it, Dorrance Armstrong plays up the field like he's supposed to do. Bobby Wagner plays over the top and makes the tackle. So I'm going to assume that that's incorrect, right? On that play, also, like Noah has a tough run fit, right? He doesn't really play it correctly. Is he in the right gap? Yes, but could he play the technique better? Yes.
Sure.
However,
he's also getting blocked by Jordan Mailata, so good luck with that.
However, you go down the list and you watch stuff like that Duran does or Drazan does. They're not always in the right gap. But what I'm saying is there is some nuance to this, right? And I do think that understanding that nuance, and the more nuance we understand and the more I can go back and watch the film, I can give a better answer to this. But at super incredibly high level, I think one of the reasons they had a hard time stopping the run this year is because of poor run fits. Now, I need to learn more about the defense to give you a definitive whether or not that's true.
Excellent. And we will check back with Professor Paulsen later in the offseason. We're getting, I mentioned this on the last show. We're working on some stuff, especially potentially just on the video side, because some of this stuff gets real detail oriented. And so we're going to get Logan a whiteboard and get it all hooked up and, have some visual aids for some of this. We'll try to do as best as we can to explain it on the audio side as well. I'm going to put my play-by-play techniques to I got to dust it off. See if that still works. See if I still got it in the skill set, Logan. See how descriptive I can be for an audio audience. But we'll see what we can do on some of that stuff because it does get really technical. But one, we know that's what you guys come to this podcast for, and two, like there's no simple way to answer some of this stuff. Like some of this is like we can just be like, yeah, that guy was in the wrong gap. Or that guy did this, or that guy, good or bad, is like not actually that insightful. And it also is sometimes pretty muddy to figure out what's good and what's bad. So we will definitely revisit this question. We keep getting it. So sometimes I do chuckle when we get a mailbag question that's literally one that we just answered. But this one is one where I think people are just like searching for more, finding different ways to ask it, to search for more information, because there's a lot of information that we need to try to get them to adequately answer what happened to the Commanders' run defense in 2024. That's enough questions answered for one show, though. If you would like to get some more in, we're going to do another mailbag early next week, so you can shoot us questions the following ways. You can hit Logan on Instagram at Logan_Paulsen82. You can go directly to me on Instagram at Hoffman.sports. That's at Hoffman.sports on Instagram. And then you can also use the contact link at HoffmanShow.com if you do not have Instagram and would just prefer to use email. That's it, and that's all for this edition of Take Command. We'll see you later in the week for our second show. Logan, I have no idea what we're going to talk about. This is the first time in months that I have no idea what we're going to talk about.
Maybe
we'll
run fits we'll talk about.
maybe we'll talk about an hour of run fits, baby. We'll see you then. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on Take Command. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command, which has a brand new home.
That's right. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980.
You can also listen to full episodes in the free Odyssey app, which is now enabled with Apple CarPlay. So we'll just, follow you around.